My name is Tracy. I'm co-founder of an organisation called Grow Remote. We are a non-profit organisation. Hello, Neil. That makes remote work local. We make it both visible and accessible in over 140 communities across 17 different countries. One of the things that our chapter leads do, or local leaders in our communities do, they'll want to get people employed remotely, they'll want to solve for isolation, or they'll want to use remote work as a way to repopulate their area. So that's happening in Ireland, in Arranmore Island, and also in Ivor in County Kerry. It also happened at Kiltyclogher in Leitrim. But now it's coming up a little bit more. You're all waving to one another, it's great. It's coming up a little bit more now because of the national policy on rural development has put relocation campaigns as a big part of it, and it was picked up by the newspapers when the policy launched, but they didn't commit to doing anything just yet. They committed to looking into it. So I suppose now is a great time for us to take advantage of others who have gone before us, to learn from them, and to maybe apply what we can then that's in a way that suits us. So with all of that said, I want to introduce Nacho. Nacho is founder of Europe's largest remote working conference called We People. Am I right, or is that, did I get a branding issue wrong there? I don't know, Nacho, you can tell me.
You got it right.
Yeah, okay, good. Sorry, so one of the first conferences to happen around this in the Canaries many years ago, and also runs co-living spaces in Las Palmas in the Canaries, and has been to the forefront of marketing campaigns that have driven people to come and live there, and with a focus on, I guess, local impact too. So, Nacho, sorry, I'll just, one more piece of housekeeping. If you've got any questions, post them in the chat. We might take 20 minutes just chatting, and then if you have your questions, ask Nacho then directly. So, Nacho, can I start off with just seeing how you got started with everything to do with co-working spaces, co-living, marketing campaigns, etc.?
Yeah, of course. To make a 6-year long story short, we started 6 years ago opening a co-working space that was actually not meant to be for remote workers. It was a space that we needed for a spin-off project of a family business, and the space was just too large for us, so we decided to allow other people to use the workspace. And 6 years ago, we got in touch with what today is a digital nomad movement. So people who already 6 years ago already worked remotely and that decided to come to the Canary Islands and to Gran Canaria in particular to work from here, started using our space. And for me in particular, it was a big surprise, the fact that actually people could do that and could have their business in Norway, but spend 6 months a year in Gran Canaria, or from anywhere else in the world. And at a personal level, for me, it was the piece that I was missing in my hometown. I was born and raised here in Gran Canaria, but lived many years in the US and also traveled around Europe until I decided to come back. And while coming back, one of the things that I was missing is that interaction with people from all over the world that were working in interesting projects. And digital nomadism 6 years ago already allowed this to happen. And Las Palmas was already naturally becoming a hub for them. So we decided to switch our focus and really start pushing into that direction by trying to transform also the perception that a lot of people across Europe and everywhere else in the world had about the Canary Islands. We have been traditionally a huge tourism destination, and a lot of people didn't know that this could be a great place also to come and work remotely from. So we started generating content that helped us sort of like change the perception of the destination. And along those lines, starting also developing services to accommodate and to facilitate the fact that they would come and stay a longer time. And one of those services was flexible accommodation. Here in Gran Canaria, it's easy to rent an Airbnb for a week or two. It's fairly complicated to get a long-term contract, and at least normally it's for a year or longer. So anything in between there was a gap, and we decided to start creating co-living spaces to accommodate remote workers, both in a flexible way, but also with a community focus, so they could, from the first day they arrived in the city, felt like home. Another initiative that we led that you already mentioned was to start a conference. The first conference was already 5 years ago, when nobody was really talking about this movement. And the purpose of the conference was also to drive people to the Canary Islands, drive remote workers to the Canary Islands. It's been evolving over the years. Now it's a much more diverse, more international event. But back in the day, the main goal was to really position ourselves as a hub for remote workers. So as you can see, it's been a natural, ongoing process that started by a personal drive that I had around this opportunity, and that now has probably become a trend with all the changes that we are suffering from this pandemic.
Yeah, not unlike the story of Grow Remote, kind of happened step by step and possibly accidentally in some regard. So to break it down there briefly, Nacho, you spoke about content and kind of positioning the Canaries as a certain location within the nomad movement. So you set up the conference, which gave you the content, and then you have very active spaces like your Facebook groups, that I know you seem to put a huge amount of work in, and a lot of WhatsApp groups. And that's kind of, I guess, where the communities come to congregate. Is that then where people first find out about you, and then they make the leap and fly over and move over? Or how is it? Well, I guess my question is, what is the sales funnel like, really? You know, where do they start, and how do they get from Ireland or wherever all the way to the Canaries?
Well, let me rephrase your question and answer you in a different way. So for us, what has worked the best, because all of these we started as a side project that started evolving naturally and then became larger and larger. And for us, what has worked the best in terms of, let's say, a marketing strategy, right, has been word of mouth. So making sure that everyone who actually made the decision to visit for the right reasons. And for the right reasons is important to highlight, because it's important to showcase the natural values, not to oversell a destination. Sell it for whatever it is that makes it special, right? And that allows you to create a force of prescriptors, so ambassadors, to call it in a way, that each of them are very digital. They already have a digital community of friends, etc., that they talk to, and the best advertisement there is the one that comes from your customer prescribing the destination. So for us, this is a slow process, right? Because obviously you can invest tons of money in digital marketing or do it in any other ways, but this is just the way we did it. Over 5-6 years, it has created an exponential growth. Also, drive to what happened this last year of the pandemic also accelerated it quite a bit. But when I look back, it's been a very natural, organic process. I'm sure there's other ways to do it, faster ways to do it, but this is the way we've done.
That's so you obviously you run your own company, right? So it's a huge amount to do to kind of sell the Canaries. We in Ireland we call it Ireland Inc. Selling Ireland Inc. and run your own business. So did you partner with anybody along the way to help get the message out there, like agencies or anybody like that?
Well, the first thing we did was to create an association of co-working spaces in the Canary Islands. To already gather whoever was there offering those services, we created this association to align the interest and to make sure we all understood that if we work together, we were all going to benefit from what we were able to do together, instead of each of us doing their own thing. So this was a very strategical step for us, because after structuring this association, which now includes almost 70 co-working spaces spread throughout the 7 islands. When we reached out to some of the institutions, we had a lot more power. So we were not Nacho Rodriguez with his co-working space trying to, I don't know, make something happen. But it was a group, 30, 40, 50, depending on the time, of co-working spaces that were, pushing some ideas, some thoughts into this movement. So I think for us that was really helpful, and also helped us integrate also the public sector, which I think that in this movement also plays an important role. From minute one.
Sorry, Nacho, you muted. I'm not sure if I did that.
Yeah, now I'm back. I was saying that as after building the association, when we reach out to some of the institutions, they already started understanding where we were heading, and they sort of understood that this was something that they should support. So from the first conference that we organized, we had support from the regional, from the island government, in particular, from the city hall, and slowly after we kept activating and doing different initiatives, we start adding to that support, the support of other institutions more at a regional level, also island government of other islands, not Gran Canaria, but Tenerife in particular, also jumped in with similar initiatives. So slowly started creating a snowball effect.
That's brilliant. It's really interesting to hear that about the association. In Ireland, we have the National Association of Enterprise Centres, or NASEC, and they've over 400 hubs across Ireland. So it's really easy to see how you could replicate that piece of it. Nacho, when you're selling anything, particularly to, I suppose, agencies, you're often selling the impact, right? So, and obviously the outcome and things like that. And when it's anything to do with government, it's often social impact. Have you been able to quantify the impact of somebody coming and living in the Canaries on a salary of X and participating, I guess, in the coffee shops and whatever else is happening?
That's a very good question. It's really hard to quantify, but what we do basically is we compare it to what does it mean for the Canary Islands, the other sector that traditionally we have invested in, which is standard massive tourism. And the reality with massive tourism, the way that the industry has developed, is that it leaves very small value in the region, because the way massive tourism travel, normally through big agencies, that some of them are international, they leave only low wage jobs in the region, because at the end it's all hotels that provide a number of services, and they try that people don't leave the hotels, and we've done that on scale. I mean, you have to consider that the Canary Islands receive 15 million tourists per year, so that's a lot of people. Living, obviously there's an impact that it's also positive, but compared to the type of profile that we are trying to attract, it's completely different. So when we talk about remote workers, first of all, they travel slowly. They're not here for a week or two. Normally, it's a matter of months. Some of them relocate permanently. They spend their money, instead of booking a package holiday somewhere in their own country, they normally hire a property or rent an Airbnb from a local owner, or actually rent a place for long term. They go to the restaurants, to the supermarket. They participate in cultural activities, in events. They socialize with the locals that are around this ecosystem. So just by thinking about the expenditure of that visitor, the impact is much higher, and also stays locally and in a distributed way, because it's not in the hands of big tourism companies or big hotel chains. So that already, you can tell the difference. But then as we move to a more, let's say, quality type of visitor that stays long-term and sometimes relocates here with their family, some of these people either work for a company or own their own company. So they start paying taxes, because once you become a resident, you start paying taxes locally. So not only you have this impact, locally, but also start generating taxes for the administration to put back into the local economy. So obviously, when you compare massive tourism with remote workers, the difference is super clear. And I think that the administration, now that remote work, there's no burdens around it, there's no tax around it, it's been accepted globally. They now also understand that how important it is to attract them and to retain them.
Brilliant, Nacho. Just as you were talking there, I was thinking, you know, it's that story that you were telling of the different islands starting up in their own little parts and all taking action and that coming together to be one big campaign. And so how do you drive local action in lots of different places? If somebody was currently renting an Airbnb of like 7 rooms in a coastal town in Ireland, what could they do to change it from just selling it on Airbnb to being something that would attract people who are working remotely and want to do co-living? And commercially, do you think that that makes sense for every business? So, for instance, you know, obviously, if you run a hotel, you're selling it at a certain amount per night, you're earning a certain margin. You change that to co-living, you're going to have to change the prices. That you're not the price of a holiday, but you're also not the price of renting. You're somewhere in the middle. And so, when does it make sense for business and when does it not?
Well, we need to make the differentiation between both models, because they, even though that they are similar, you know, I could see a small boutique hotel with a co-living, the structure of operational costs and the things you need to focus on are totally different. So on a co-living, I think the key to compare both models is that normally the operational costs of a co-living are much lower, and that's why you can focus on more long-term, cheaper rates, more than short-term rotation, higher rates, with a lot of services on top that drive the operational cost very high. So that's the first differentiation that we need to make. And also the second reason why this could be interesting for any operator in Ireland is, who are you competing against? How many co-livings are there out there, or how many hotels / vacation rentals are out there? So when you are there, you know, by yourself, but not competing against, you know, thousands of other alternatives, it also guarantees a higher occupation rate. So you have to put that into the variable of, okay, would I like to change my business? This is, you know, the different occupation rates, different operational costs, and different concepts. And then you need to think about, okay, what makes a co-living and what's the reason behind a co-living, which is quite different from a hotel. A co-living is driven by community. People want to interact with each other. In a hotel, normally people are, you know, doing their own thing. They just want a room where they can sleep, and, you know, some services like breakfast and the people that clean your room, etc. In a co-living, people want to live. They want to make a living, and they want to interact with other people. So the whole structure of the value proposition is totally different from a hotel. But as we see co-living grow exponentially worldwide, I think it's not only connected to a generational trend, but also to a total transition in the way we work and the way we live, which is obviously connected to the ability to work from anywhere. I think that this model it's going to become more and more interesting, and it's also going to have a big impact in activating some regions that probably were not traditionally tourism destinations, but had a high quality of living and attracts now a lot of people that before couldn't live there because they couldn't work remotely.
To answer your question around who they will be competing with, nobody. So I'm dying for somebody to try it, I guess, to test it. And you did just mention community there, and I suppose if I look at the difference between you know, an irregular Airbnb and definitely what you do, Nacho, I'm not sure about how others do it, but it is community. So would you say that then a lot of your time is spent on facilitating that, or bringing people together, or events or meetups, more so than you would if you were running, I guess, obviously a regular boutique hotel or something like that?
Well, interestingly, uh, when my goal, which is to allow our co-livers to have the ownership to make things happen themselves, which might sound a bit tricky. I'm not doing it only to go away and not do my job, but it's actually the way things will work best. If you just allow your customers to take the ownership of the space, they're going to make their experience their own, and that's why makes a difference for them, because they actually feel like home, like they were living anywhere else, and just the fact, the difference is that they're living with other people in a place that is not their like normal residence. But that's when the experience is, in my opinion, at its best. So as an operator, you just have to facilitate things or whatever is needed for them to take ownership of their own experience. If you become an animator, like you will find in the swimming pool of a hotel, and try to bring people to do aqua exercise in the pool, that's great, but that's a vacation holiday type of deal. In our case, in CoLiving, you want to facilitate, hey, do you want to go on a hike? Well, I can give you hints on where to go on a hike. Do you want to organize a barbecue? Well, I want to make sure that you have a barbecue, you have gas, so you know where to buy the right food, and you can gather with your other colivers and have a fun time. So the deal here is to really facilitate, but also give ownership of their own experience.
Just as you're speaking there, Nacho, the founder of Nomad List did a really interesting correlation around why people travel, and there was an inverse relationship between the cost of living and experience in the culture. So if it's more expensive to travel to Ireland or whatever, they will go to Ireland to experience a new culture. Experience of a new culture is the main driver. What do you think is the main driver of people who travel to repeat people to stay?
Well, first of all, I'm not 100% agree with Peter Levels on this quote. And the reason for this is that if we look at digital nomadism and how it has evolved over the last 5-6 years, it is totally true that a lot of the early digital nomads were taking advantage of price differences between countries to make their money last longer, right? And that's why they went to Southeast Asia, because they could rent a villa with swimming pool for 400 euros, and that's totally unthinkable in Europe. And they could work remotely, so hey, they could make a lot more with their income than they could do in London or in Dublin, right? But as we see remote work being introduced in the corporate level at any levels, a lot of the new remote workers, so-called corporate nomads, don't have that urge to only look for cheap price because they make a good living. So, and if they could live in Dublin or in London before, they could live in San Francisco probably. So the price is not anymore the only drive. So when we look at the Canary Islands and Gran Canaria in particular, there are some areas that could be very equivalent to some of the price tags in Ireland. But I don't think we compete in prices. For that, Southeast Asia will always win the battle because we are in Europe for the good and the bad. But we compete with lifestyle, I think. So the combination of climate, quality of living, things to do, is what makes our value proposition better, not necessarily only the price. You're on mute now.
Oops, yes, I can resonate with that. Yeah, there you go. It has to happen once. Elaine just asks, what are the key factors of a successful relocation campaign to attract remote workers to a rural area? And Nacho, I know that you do kind of work with more rural areas too. And I think it might be a little bit different to cities because obviously it's a different experience, it's a different thing. But do you have any experience of that?
Yeah, well, we need to make sure that the audience understands that rural in the Canary Islands is a bit different than it might be in Ireland.
Yeah.
Because we're islands, it's small islands. You can drive around in 45 minutes. You can go anywhere else further down in 45 minutes. So the distance factor of rural and city is not key, which I understand in many other places is what makes a big difference. But we can talk about something that we can relate, which is the smaller islands. So in the Canary Islands, there is the Tenerife and Gran Canaria, which are the two capitals of the two provinces, which are the main economic hubs of the Canaries and where everything happens. But there's other five, well, technically six islands that are much smaller and that could be compared to a rural area. And the way we find incentives to attract people to the smaller islands is totally connected to the experience that you have there. We recently launched a project in the island of La Palma, which is where my actual father was born. This is an island that is heavily dependent on agriculture, huge banana plantations everywhere, avocados. So the economy is very based on agriculture. And it's a beautiful place to go hiking. It's one of the best places in the world to watch stars. So we connect that value proposition with the professionals who have the freedom to work from anywhere, and it's been quite successful so far. So again, you need to focus on what are the incentives, what are the natural values of a specific rural area, a specific region, and try to portray that and try to attract a small enough community that can start driving change.
I'm just thinking about there's an area in Connemara where they make it's moonshine. It's our illegal. It's called Putchine. It's our illegal whiskey, and I can think that's it. That's a unique selling point for that particular area of Ireland. Nacho, you just mentioned there around corporate nomads, which is the first time that I've heard that. But when we look at what's happening in, say, Tulsa, there was another country or area who were running a relocation campaign, but they put in an income minimum, a minimum salary that you had to be on. So it was like you had to be on $60,000 a year in order to avail of the relocation package. Do you think that it is a different sell for digital nomads? It might be freelancers and people who are working for organizations like GitLab or Automatic or something like that, where it's more employment and it's more working for one company all of the time. Do you think that the proposition is different and that even how you deliver it might be slightly different?
Well, if you ask me about my opinion about that particular measure of limiting, the budget somebody has to make in order to attract them, I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not. I would probably not limit it, because again, when you think about community building, diversity is also important. So not only segmenting in and focusing on a specific target group is necessarily a good idea, particularly when you're starting to attract people. If you're already a hub and you want to promote attracting people with higher salaries, well, that already makes sense. But when you're starting, I think that's probably not necessarily the right thing. I'm reading a question here about financial incentives to attract remote workers, and I think that some organizations that you will hear from directly, like Aaron in Tulsa Remote, have done it successfully. I think that more than financial incentives, so basically providing X amount of money to allow people to make their decision. It could work, because actually when taking the decision to move, to relocate, particularly for those who relocate for a long period, so more than a year or longer, sometimes it involves a lot of costs of moving, of relocating, etc. So at least cutting down those costs, I think that it will make people's decision a lot easier, because it's managing risk, the risk of doing the wrong decision. So if you tell them, listen, I will cover your relocation costs if you stay here for a year, then there's no problem or no risk on trying it. So in that segment, or in that, for that purpose, I definitely think that those incentives could definitely work. But on the other side, putting too many artificial incentives around attracting people who can work anywhere around the world I think it could generate a bounce back effect. So if people come for the incentives and after a year they don't like it, it's not really connected to what they are looking for, or it was an oversell and actually it was promoted the wrong way, they're going to bounce back and they're going to move somewhere else. So at the end, it's going to become not only a non-customer, but it's going to become somebody that is not going to talk well about the destination. So the effect midterm, it actually works. So you need to be careful with
that. That is a great point. So guys, any more questions for Nacho, just to open up the floor a little bit more? I know as you were talking there, Nacho, I was thinking I want to see if somebody will loan us an Airbnb during the winter months, and we could just try it collectively and see what we could get to. But just feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question there if anybody has one. CoLiving was saying about Donegal and that developing of co-living resorts in Donegal. I haven't heard that yet, but it is really interesting to hear if that is happening, because we need to start somewhere. John,
I just jump in. Hi, Nacho. I just didn't want to let others speak too, but just thinking from the perspective that we're at the very early stage of the journey around some of this stuff, like, and going back to maybe Nacho, your early stage of the journey with it in the Canaries, like, where would you start, like, on a very simple, like, from a pilot test and learn perspective, rather than trying to do it all in one go? Like, what could we do just to get the ball rolling on this, to see if there's an appetite?
Well, I think that Tracy just pointed something out, and I can tell you how we did our test in La Palma Island in February this year, without going back 5 years when we started. I always thought that La Palma had a lot of potential, but I didn't know it. I wasn't quite sure. So what we did is we looked up for a property that, because of the current pandemic conditions, it was a vacation rental, but it was totally empty. They didn't have any bookings until November this year. It fit perfectly the capacity and the type of accommodation that we thought it would be ideal. We made an agreement with the owners and proposed them a 3 months long trial project. And we put it out there, we launched it, and we managed to fill the property. And it's been an amazing experience that also gave us a lot of valuable information about the destination that we didn't know. Because we as locals sometimes have a perception of things that could be different from somebody that comes from the outside. So it was very important to hear that feedback, to see what they found interesting, in order to allow a more long-term type of project, which is what we are actually working on now.
Brilliant, thanks, Emil. And I have one follow-on question. I see somebody else put something in the chat though. Would you recommend, Nacho, that, like, communities should come together and work together on this, or is it like something very like place specific? So, like, are people trying to target it to get them to come to County Donegal or to County Wexford, where I am, or is it something that, like, we need to do across Ireland or across a part of Ireland together?
Well, in my opinion, this transition of globally accepting remote work and the fact that we don't have to be tied to a location, it's so big and so huge for humanity as a whole. It's as big as the Industrial Revolution was 200 years ago. That it takes a global effort and a lot of collaboration, because we are more and more tending into globalization for the good and the bad, and this particular part of not being tied to a location to be able to work and to make a living, it's so huge that requires a global effort. So definitely I'm up for total collaboration.
Thanks a million.
Elaine, I don't know if you want to come in yourself there, but a great question. So in Ireland, Nacho, there is you can just unmute yourself, Elaine, if you'd like to, but in Ireland, there is a big focus on the diaspora. So people who would have left, obviously years ago, they left, they went to America. My generation left, they went to Australia. People leave, and there's a big thing around trying to bring them home. And so Elaine is asking around, do you target them in particular? There you go. Elaine's in a shared workspace. Yeah, you're not. So she can't come in and speak. But do you target them specifically, Nacho? People who've moved away and want to come home?
Totally. That's a great question, Elaine. Our strategy has three points. So the first one we already talked about, which is attract talent, right? Attract international talent to a specific location so that they can generate that community, they can generate that impact. The second goal is to recuperate talent. The Canary Islands have, over the last 4 decades, lost a lot of very talented individuals, probably fairly similar to what probably has happened in Ireland, or at least in the rural areas of Ireland. Because they couldn't find the jobs that they deserved, and they had to go to big cities, to other countries, etc., to work there, and never came back until now that remote work is a thing, and their companies can allow them to actually come back without leaving back their careers that they actually put a lot of effort into building, right? And the third aspect, which is even more important, is retain talent. So not only you want to recuperate the one you lost, but you want to make sure that the emerging talent, the younger generations, don't have a reason to leave, because they can actually find their jobs, their professions, the right people, the right opportunities locally without having to leave. And that's super important for any city, any location, any country, right? To retain the talent that they have generated.
Absolutely, and it definitely is. It definitely is a problem here, and it has been. We actually have we had a minister for diaspora. That was their job, and I think that linking in there, it was Kieran Cannon, for anybody who's watching, that had that mandate. How long, Nacho, is the average stay of somebody who comes into the co-living? Do you know? I know that extensions are the most common thing.
Again, we are very flexible, and a lot of people come to test out and see if they like it or not, because I understand that sometimes they could have their doubts if they haven't been here before, if they haven't met some of the community, etc. The average, it's normally between a month and 3 months, so anything in between. It also varies a little bit during the season, like the winter stays are longer just because also people are running away from European winter, while during the summer they might be a bit shorter because even though the climate here doesn't vary too much, but it's also nice everywhere else in Europe, so they have other alternatives to go to. But yeah, that's actually the case in our co-livings. We are one of the projects we are working on. It's more family-oriented co-livings, because the families have different needs when it comes down to co-living, and we expect that to be much longer stays, also connected to the educational needs of the kids. So anywhere between 6 months and a year. But yeah, so far that's the average that we have at our own co-livings.
That's great to know, Nacho. Queeveen has asked a really good question there. So in Donegal, which is the northwest of Ireland, beautiful. I actually once went to Finland to go and find the Northern Lights, and that week they were in Donegal, not in Finland. But we have thousands of second homes, and that's obviously a big thing for us in our communities, Nacho, where people buy holiday homes and they come for 1 or 2 months a year, and the rest they're empty. And he says that these could be used to attract digital nomads. And is Airbnb the best platform, or are there other platforms that you use?
So Airbnb is definitely a good platform. It's just important to make sure how to showcase the property when trying to attract remote workers, in terms of showcasing that there's a workspace, that there's a good enough internet connection, so that it doesn't feel like it's only a holiday home, but it's a place where people can work, and also consider the rates. It's not the same for someone who wants to rent a house for a week that might need it for 3 months. So an Airbnb already includes that feature, the long-term rates, that are differentiated, so that that it's also feasible for people who are looking for a long-term stay. So and then there's also other platforms popping up these days, more specifically to remote workers. But as of today, I would say that Airbnb is probably the best alternative for holiday homes. If it was for co-living, there's other platforms like CoLiving.com that only feature co-livings. So it would depend on the type of use that you would give to the property.
Yeah, probably working with the various different communities. Like there's Remote Work Europe and a couple of different communities where you can use to talk about programs you're developing. Elaine asked another question around what elements differ in relocation offering and marketing campaigns for groups, families, and individuals. And I'll give you my interpretation of how you do things, Nacho. I think you say, here's what we have here. We have good weather, we have a community, we have all of these things. And then whoever is attracted to what you have comes, and it's quite open. As opposed to saying we want to target this particular group and a particular marketing campaign for them and them and them. Is that correct? Or have I overcomplicated it?
No, totally. I think that's exactly how we have done it. I'm not saying that there's no other ways of approaching this idea. And as we've lived this explosion of remote work now, the market is much bigger, and it might make more sense to I don't know, develop the specific marketing campaigns to attract them. But it's important to differentiate. I mean, now this community now has different needs. If it's a family, again, education is a part. Normally, it's longer stays. Needs for an accommodation are larger. Normally, you would need at least a 2-bedroom, sometimes even a 3-bedroom if you want to have a home office. While a room for your kids and for you. Also, families have specific needs just for families in terms of finding a school, finding a park to go to with the kids, or finding kids activities, which is also important. And when we talk about individuals, it's much more flexible. So the community focus is more important. The lifestyle, the activities that are available out there. So there are different target groups, and it depends on what's your product or your service. You just have to differentiate.
Yes, very interesting, Nacho. Actually, just as you're talking there, I'm wondering, is it possible to do a relocation campaign without co-living? Because from what I see that you do, you're kind of like an airport, you're a landing zone, and people, if they want to explore or test here, they can come to Re People and stay in an accommodation that's suitable for that, and then they can see. And there's kind of there's a step between where you're coming from and where you're going to. Do you think it's possible to?
Totally. I think that because of the specific type of service that we offer, it's super easy for anyone to soft land in our city, to connect with the community on day one, and to feel like they are at home from day one. That normally takes a while. If you go to a place where you've never been, where don't know anyone, just think about the time it takes you to socialize and to discover the places and meet other friends, etc. Right? So definitely, I think our co-livings are a soft landing pad for everyone who. During this winter, we had a lot of people who came to the co-living and then ended up renting long-term their own place, because they already wanted to have their own place. They knew that they wanted to stay long-term, so it makes more sense also financially for them to have their own place, and for us that's an accomplished goal. So it's totally fine. So definitely I think we do play a key factor in making sure that people actually stay longer.
Yeah, soft landing, that's a really great way to put it. In my head, I'm kind of structuring the criteria, the program, I guess, of how these are run in different locations. And just on that last point, Nacho, Gareth there is asking about the percentage of those who end up becoming long-term residents.
Well, that's a good question. We do have a very high percentage of returning visitors. So people over the last 3-4 years that at least come once per year. Some of them even twice. Some of them who actually leave and 2 weeks later they come back. So, which is a good sign, right? Because that means that the destination has, you know, the right value proposition for them. And more, and I think that this is rough times to give those estimates, because the situation nowadays is very complicated for people to take decisions long term. But we are seeing an increment of the people who actually decide to become temporary residents. So meaning, you know, more than 6 months, have a home base here and maybe travel the rest of the year. We see more and more of that. It would be hard to give you a percentage, but it's definitely increasing.
That's brilliant, and it's great that happens, that both people return and that they become long-term residents. I'm just wondering, I missed one question there. Could you have a co-living exchange type program and network between countries? Claire, I know you're on your iPhone, but you can come in on that maybe, because I'm not quite sure what you mean, but maybe you would know, Nacho.
Well, I think that it's clear. I don't know. Well, Claire is popping up, so happy to have you.
Hello.
Hi, Claire.
Hello, I'm in a car park here, so apologies. But it was just, you know, for first time people trying to think of the initiative, you know, if there was sort of a structured place where you could, you know, it's just in the town that we're in, there's a lot of derelict buildings that could be repurposed, and it might be an addition to try and for sort of renewal of the town, without sort of trying to do too much, just sort of a small version of it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of beta testing. So it's super important to test something before actually going all out. And it's how we've approached things in the past. So I definitely doing something small scale, learning from it, learning from the feedback from your visitors, and then scaling or redoing it or rethinking it. Even if you realize that it doesn't make sense, well, it's better to take a step back when you haven't done a big investment than when you've done it. So yeah, definitely I think that's the way to go. And there was another question here that I felt it was interesting. Hotels repositioning to offer this remote working experience. Yeah, this is happening. This has been happening all winter long. Obviously, tourism was down more than 80% in the Canary Islands, and we have to understand that the Canary Islands, 40% of the GDP comes from tourism. So you have an idea of the impact of COVID for the Canary Islands. So we've been collaborating with some resorts to do different pop-up co-living, so temporary co-livings in some of the traditionally tourism places like resorts, and also seeing more and more the industry approaching us to understand how they could really reposition their product or services to attract a more long-term customer. This is not only happening in tourism destinations like the Canary Islands, but we need to think about all the hotels that are in cities that depend on people who travel for meetings. That market, I was reading an article the other day on Economist that said that it was probably going to be 50% down after the pandemic, just because remote work is a thing now. So they are definitely going to have to think about repositioning their products, because the market is going to be cut in half. So we're going to see a lot of that in the next months or years.
That's actually a great point around remote work. Travel will be down, therefore their initial market changes. Now, before I get into a question from Elaine, like one of the really interesting things that, again, I feel about this particular piece is that we don't need to wait for the government to do something, that there's a business opportunity in it. And so for the likes of a hotel, if they were looking to reposition themselves, is it, I guess, when we're selling remote work to large Irish enterprises, we sell it on the return on investment first, and then the social impact and other impacts second. And so if we were trying to convince a hotel owner in Ireland to take a look at this, would we say, what would we say? Would we say, you know, you're going to earn a lot of money, or you're going to, what's the sell? if that
Well,
makes sense.
it will really depend on the hotel and where it's located and where the customers before and what was their business model. But again, we see this as a trend that it's only going to grow in the next years and probably quite fast. The same way that this transition has been so fast in very short time that many of us haven't quite realized what the hell is going on, right? So we definitely it really depends on also on the needs and of each hotel, but definitely this is a fairly safe bet in terms of betting on where things are heading and how to really tap into a movement that it's only going to grow in the next years. Is if it was last year before the pandemic, it would have been a big risk for anyone, because I think that this movement, if it wasn't because of the pandemic, it was going to take still 5 or 10 more years to really go to where we are at right now. But as of today, things are going to go really fast. So definitely those who take that step forward in advance are going to benefit from being in the market in the first place. I guess to your question, the pitch to a hotel is like, would you like to be ahead of the market? If the answer is yes, then let's do it.
Yeah, and I guess like you say, it's beta testing. If they have a lot of rooms and there's a portion you're not really losing too much, and you're checking to see. One last question for you. Elaine asks around the importance on programs and courses designed at helping people to adjust to the region after relocating in terms of culture, employment, trends, lifestyle. And you mentioned about feeling at home on day one, and that's definitely feedback that I've heard from the work that you do. Day one, it's just like you've never, were you ever living anywhere else? But is there, and again, you empower the community to do that for themselves, but is there anything, programs or courses, to help that integration piece, I guess?
Well, this is a great question, because this is very important. We need to think that remote workers travel to places to experience those places, to understand what are they about, and what's the culture, the traditions, the food, a lot of things. Compared to traditional tourism that could go to a hotel chain, it doesn't matter if it's in the Caribbean or in the Canary Islands or in Norway, they just want the same standard service. This is a different story. People travel to places because they want to experience those places. So actually making sure that you feature the culture, the gastronomy, the activities, the history of those places is super important, because it's only going to make their experience better. And there's a problem around that, because normally locals give that for granted, because this is the way things have been always. I mean, this is normal. This is they don't put that in value often. But for somebody that it comes from the outside, probably that's the reason why they are there. So if you don't structure and give the right information, be it in courses or in just services, whatever it is, they're probably not going to understand, what makes that particular place special. And that's why I think it's super important.
One last question. Giacomo, I think it is, asked, how did you create the network of Airbnb owners? But if I'm correct, you created a network of co-working spaces.
Yes, that's what he meant. We created a network of co-working spaces by gathering all the different owners, explaining them our mission and why it was important for them to be part of our association, and then the new spaces jumped in after it was already settled.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Nacho, you were the first in a series that will, I guess, set the conversation going in Ireland for how we'd like to take our first steps in this. And as I said to you, it kind of feels like the very start of Go Remote in 2018, where you just feel an uprising of something, and that something's going to happen in the next couple of months, and we need to drive action where we can. And I think for me today, you've definitely given us very actionable pieces. I'm going to tweet out and see if somebody will give me an Airbnb for November and December. Quiet months, right? And you could try it in a rural area, some yoga, some guitar playing. you know. It doesn't need to be everything to all people, and it's definitely doable, and then going from there, right?
Awesome, totally.
So thank you very much. And guys, if you have any more questions, feel free to send them in to us on Grow Remote. Use the Slack community, use the Facebook groups, and we do want to keep the conversation going, and we'll have these series on each Monday for the remainder of May at 1 p.m. And hopefully at the end, we're going to go back to the Department of Rural and Community Development, let them know what we've learned, best practice across the world, and see what it is that we can take action on in Ireland.